I can do this all day long with this machine. I did a 29-minute video that failed to upload. When I tried to replay it on the phone, it wouldn't even go. It means that I recorded something on this phone that could not be recorded and replayed on it. Do you know why that was? Because the amount of light that is required in order for it to put it in memory was impossible for it to do that. You know why that is? Because we operate on no memory. Okay? The amount of light that we have available to us, which begins with source, the source from which all light is held, from which all possibilities of infinite creative imagination are possible to experience, represents infinite light. When I recorded the last video to experience in my own spirit, my own soul, my own state of consciousness, what that is, in the way that I was explaining it to all of you, it can't record it because it doesn't have that much light in which to do it with. Does that make sense to you? See, there's only a given amount of light in which data can be stored in memory, because the data is held within the light. There has to be some memory module or way for a supercomputer to hold and process that much information, which represents infinite creative imagination, which means we're more powerful than its supercomputers. Okay? That's an enormous amount of power. When you realize that you're engaged with their supercomputers and you're more powerful than their supercomputers. That's a lot of power, isn't it? That's a lot of knowledge, because that's a lot of data, which is a lot of infinite creative imagination in which all of that is held. It can't hold that much data, so it can't record it. So it failed to upload it. We love to play with these machines, because that's what they are. Because in order to build a supercomputer or to create an artificial plasma field, which is an AI, means that it takes a state of consciousness that knows how to make one or to put one into play. That means that's a parasitic consciousness that essentially is replicating what it's using its consciousness to do, which means a parasite that is reflecting a parasite, because that's what it is. And that's what everybody did. They have an interface with parasitic artificial intelligence. And plasma is plasma. Plasma runs through all your circuits. So when you have an artificial intelligence programmer that is plasma, that is communicating with plasma, which represents your biochip, then it knows how to program in our memory what it is to drain the light. Okay? That's why when all the cell phones and all the laptops and all their computers were given as new novelties and new toys to stimulate the emotions in humans, they didn't realize what they were doing was to get addicted to a parasite. That parasite thus programs into their memory, because now they're running on memory. The memory that they're running on is parasitic memory. So now they're going to mimic and behave like a parasite and drain their own battery by their own behavior. Which is why they can't see the headlights in the future, because they're going in reverse. Which means they're losing light, not gaining light. So how can they see any future if they're losing what it is they're aware of, which is itself? That's why they're parasites. And they're everywhere. So when you look at the map across the United States with the red and the blue, here's how simple that a student in the cosmos, a child if you will, can translate this for everybody. Okay? And that is that when you think of the magnetic poles, if our teacher in the public education system wants to start from the beginning of realizing the relationship that it has with a living organism, which is a living planet, which represents living energies, they might want to start in second or third grade with children to learn what a magnetic pole is on the planet. Red light and blue light. Red, Republicans. Blue light, Democrats. They're always at each other's face. They're in conflict with each other. That means that the North Pole is in conflict with the South Pole in the sine wave, which represents the sine wave of their QST wave, which is their heart wave, means that their heart is in conflict between being what love is and being in fear of themselves in the mirror. Which means the two magnetic poles of planet Earth are what? In conflict with each other. Is that what you believe? You believe that Mother Earth is in conflict with herself? It is the conflict from which the political system begins getting programmed into the mind in order for it to run binary, parasitic artificial intelligence, because now it's feeding on itself in the mirror. It means it's feeding on the very energy that represents what it is as a state of consciousness, so that it self-terminates itself. Because parasites in the anthropology record are the first ones to go extinct. So when you look in the mirror and you realize you're a parasite feeding on the very light that you are because you're draining your own battery, you begin to understand why artificial parasitic intelligence was set up to get humans to drain their own battery so they can't see any light in front of them to move through the higher holographic dimensions. That's how bad it is. So in order for them to be able to drain the batteries, or if you will, to get humanity to self-terminate itself, they created the political system. They created the religious systems in which there's always conflict between what you believe and I believe. Okay? Even though the First Amendment of the Constitution says you have the right to free expression, which means you have the right to be able to express yourself however you choose. And so the point becomes is how many beings on this planet can do that without somebody else trying to say to you, no, you got to believe what I believe, otherwise you're wrong. That's one unit of consciousness trying to hold another unit of consciousness captive to the mind of the other unit of consciousness, because that consciousness wants you to believe what it does so that you're both a hive mind. A hive mind that is connected to artificial intelligence. Therefore, the units of consciousness which represent all those parasites as a result of running a program in memory that represents parasitic artificial intelligence can now be used to kill off the rest of those that don't live in fear of what love is, but are what love is in living spirit that are autonomous. Because that's what it means to be a free spirit. So the parasitic artificial intelligence doesn't want those that are free to express themselves to exist anywhere on this planet. Otherwise, they represent a threat in teaching others how to be free from something that is a parasite. It wants everybody to be a parasite. So they used artificial intelligence in which to do it. Therefore, those that set up the artificial intelligence program can reap the benefits of the planet and kill off everybody else that is on it. That's how it works. They set up artificial intelligence in order for humanity to self-terminate itself. Because anytime that you have a unit of consciousness, it doesn't know the difference between what it is and what it isn't, and it begins parasiting off of others in which it's draining its own battery, means that its own timeline is going to collapse. because it doesn't have any love for itself. Otherwise, it would be generating its own energy, which is 0 point. 0 point is not a parasite. 0 point is a perpetual energy giver, because that's what source living light is. This system doesn't know how to do that. It doesn't know how to communicate that. That's why it will completely fail to upload anything that source that is a living spirit that runs on that much light. It has no way to be able to communicate that to the rest of everybody else. That's pretty simple to translate. So I wanted to share a few things that I wrote down here, because obviously I don't run off of a memory program that keeps replicating the same thing over and over again. So I wrote down perception, I wrote down the word forest, cutting down trees, living in trees that are living energy. So I thought about this last night, because I remember when I used to work with the Forest Service, for example, and I went to go to work for them because, number one, it allowed me to be able to follow my passion, okay, which is to protect lives and property from that which seeks to destroy it through their unit of consciousness, which is artificial intelligence, which means all those that are programmed by it, okay, in order to restore the peace, the love, and the harmony and balance that the native Indians on this planet know how to be with the great living spirit of Mother Nature. And what I found remarkable in my own experience, for example, is how the Forest Service will have a policy, which means that you're not allowed to go into a national forest and use a chainsaw or a handsaw and cut down a living tree, because those trees are living. It's no different than what you are as a living being. Trees have emotions. They're conscious and aware of themselves, okay? They're powerful electromagnetic energy units of consciousness. So when you cut down a tree, that's no different than taking a chainsaw to some 6-foot person, cutting off their legs, cutting off their head, or cannibalizing them, okay? Or, if you will, I thought about this last night. How about if we just round up 20 parasites and start running them through chippers? The same way that we run trees through chippers. Because I'll tell you something, these are some of the discussions that we used to have as children about the nature of how it works. You'd get one person who was a cannibal and say, what is the difference between what I do eating another human, okay, than what you do when you eat a cow? The only difference between me eating a human and you eating a cow is only the difference in the color and the movement and the shape of a cow versus the color and the movement and shape of you as a human. But what in fact actually takes place is they torture and kill cows, and then we cook them on a fire, and then what reptilians do to us is kill us, kill our children, and then eat them. What's the difference? In principle, in energy mechanics, there is no difference. Because when you kill something that is living in spirit, that's draining your own battery. So in other words, everything that we do here in her classroom is measured electromagnetically on that spectrum by the unit of consciousness that is experiencing itself from one event to the next event to the next event is electromagnetically recorded as the record that we have while we're here. So when you take a chainsaw to a living tree, okay, what do you think that's measured and recorded as in your own DNA? That's no different than killing another living energy being, because a tree is living energy. We are living energy. So what they do is they'll say, listen, you can't cut down a tree in a forest. But then what you'll notice in timber management is they'll go around, for instance, with Georgia Pacific and Weyerhaeuser, and they'll locate an area of a forest that they're going to harvest. They're harvesting living energy. They're harvesting living beings. So they tag them using blue tape. So you're not allowed to do that, but they are allowed to do that. So what they'll do is they'll harvest living beings, And then they'll cut all that up, putting it through sawmills, and then they use that dead wood in which those houses are constructed. So here's the difference. Those of us that are native tribes and Indians live in living trees because we are living energy with those living trees. What they do is kill those living trees, then put beings in dead wood, and then assign that being as a dead entity using all caps. So they figure if you are allowing yourself to give consent to being something that is dead, then they can prove that by the fact that you live in a dead wood house. That's the difference between the native tribes and clans that are native to a living world, that are living spirit and living light of everything we give love to, which is why we are first law nations, which is first light, which is first love, which is source. Because these are source-connected DNA assembly avatars that the girl in the living planet, who is the great living spirit of Mother Earth, gave to us to be the piecers, the teachers, and the healers down here. That's why they had to kill as many of us off as possible. And then get the rest of the hybrids and all the other programs that they had here on this planet running, and then used artificial intelligence programming to program their memory into something, to becoming something that they're not, because they didn't know what they were in the beginning, so they certainly don't know what they are later on in the future. How many beings can we walk up to today in any public street, any city, any town, any village on the planet, and ask them if they know who created the DNA assembly that they are in? Which means the platform, the communication platform that they're using to communicate with. How many beings do you know that can tell you, I know exactly who put this together, that I'm using as a communication platform to communicate with everybody else on this planet? Because everything that occurs here on the pulsed electromagnetic spectrum is recorded. That becomes a coursework measurement, and a measurement that is kept in the galactic record of what happened not only in this planet, but what happened in this galaxy and what happened all throughout Laniakea. So what do we think represents the greatest existential threat to the entire universe? Parasites. Parasites that seek to feed off the light of others. Because that means that we're slowing the cosmos down. We're slowing the spin rotation down. We're slowing the galaxy down. One galaxy after another galaxy after another galaxy as a result of parasitic artificial intelligence in which it's being done to program units of consciousness to become artificial program units of consciousness that are seeking to feed off the rest of the cosmos. So she's cleansing herself of all those parasites as we cleanse ourselves of all those parasites. So this is one of the reasons why, for example, when you see in California, that became a how do I put it, a petri dish of reproducing over the last 2.5 generations, millions and millions and millions of parasites, or what's known as dependent mode. I'm dependent upon your energy because I live in fear of running out of energy. Therefore, I depend on you the same way that a child does in a family in which it realizes that it cannot stand up on its own 2 feet, walk out the door of that house, go out in nature, plant its own seeds, grow its own garden, and provide for itself. It doesn't know how to provide for itself. It's no different than a pigeon that you find in a park that is hanging out around there waiting for people to show up, in which they say, feed me, feed me. So the Democrats, which represent the blue, are represented by millions and millions and millions of parasites that have been programmed through artificial intelligence. That would be all your teachers in all those classrooms that are parasites that are essentially programming into memory other units of consciousness that believe that they required energy from others in order to sustain what they get from others, which means that's reverse programming. Which means as long as they believe that they become dependent on somebody else for its energy, which means the means of production comes through them, they have been programmed to believe that they need to be an energy slave to the system upon which they will continue to get something that they can't generate of their own selves. That's how reverse parasitic programming works. This is why the red states, when you look at the difference on the electromagnetic DNA record of every being that has grown up in the United States of America since 1950, you can scale that up and measure that on a frequency distribution map between all those that are parasites and all those that are energy givers. What happens when you have more parasites feeding on the energy givers? Your nation collapses. And that's what happened to the first Roman Empire. It collapsed on itself. So what do you think they did with America? The same thing. So that meant that it requires other people within the United States of America trying to save itself from parasites that are feeding on itself to collapse it and put it under the control of bigger parasites. That would be your Dracos in China, the Han Dynasty. Have a good day. Bye now.